أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء وسيد المرسلين وحبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المكرمين الغرر الميامين، سيما بقية الله في الأراضين وحجته على الخلائق أجمعين، سيدنا وإمام زماننا وصاحب نعمتنا وولي أمرنا مهدي هذه الأمة وطاووس أهل الجنة الحجة بن الحسن العسكري، فداه أرواح العالمين. Brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's a story narrated by none other than the creator of the universe, the Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it's right there in the final revelation for everyone to read until the day of judgment. When God tells the story of Egypt's Pharaoh, there are obviously many twists and turns. It's a very exciting, very intriguing tale of heroism, of sacrifice, of love, and of obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But there is a point in the story when Musa approaches Fir'aun for the first time. Now you have to take history and put it into context. You have a man who considered himself the creator of the universe. Fir'aun saw himself as the supreme Lord of the world. And if you have someone with so much hubris, so much arrogance as Fir'aun, the last thing you want to do is to stand up to him and tell him that you're no God. You're just another man with the same needs, same deficiencies, same inadequacies as every other person. You even have to go to the bathroom to relieve yourself, for crying out loud. Fir'aun, by the way, traditions tell us, avoided this very human act. In order to project a divine image of himself, he felt like going to the bathroom would obviously violate this image. And so he ate a lot less, and he ate nutritious foods. Specifically, the hadith tells us, he ate a lot of bananas in order to avoid having to go to the bathroom every once in a while and ruin that divine image that he's been building for himself. So the last thing you want to do to someone like that is to stand up to him and say, you're a man just like everybody else. But that's exactly what Musa did. And without going into too much detail, Musa approaches Fir'aun. And he only has one message. And the total sum of that message is summarized in La ilaha illallah. There is no God save Allah, the ineffable, inconceivable, omnipotent, omniscient creator of the universe, not you. This God has specific characteristics, features that distinguish him from all of his creatures. Right? That was the message of Musa. It's not too complicated. Even a 10-year-old can understand it. Fir'aun was offended. Fir'aun felt that image which he had been working on, building for so many decades, had now been tarnished irreparably. And so that was the biggest insult Musa could make at Fir'aun. What did Fir'aun do? He said, have him killed. Like every other tyrant throughout history. every other despot who cannot bear the thought of dissent, the thought of someone actually thinking for themselves, someone deciding to break free from the chains of servitude. No tyrant can take this. So the first thought is, let's have him killed. Allah tells in the Quran of a character that suddenly emerges within this saga, within this tale, that our traditions refer to as Mu'min al-Fir'aun. Mu'min al-Fir'aun was a member of the same household as Fir'aun, but he was different in that he was secretly a believer. He hid his belief in Allah. Overtly, he pretended to be like everybody else, every other member of the royal family, but deep down, he was a believer in dissimulation, a believer in taqiyya, so to speak. This is a red line that prompts this believer to stand up and make a stance. When he sees someone being killed for no crime other than saying, I worship God and not a man, when this person's life is now in danger, the believer from Al-Fir'aun makes a stance. The red line's been crossed. And so he tells Fir'aun, for the first time ever, reveals his belief. But he doesn't talk about strictly religious things. Think about this. He addresses commonsensical matters of virtue, morals, and ethics. He's not coming up with scripture from the Quran. He's saying this makes sense. What you're doing makes absolutely no sense. This is an injustice. This is an abomination. This is abhorrent. This is wrong. Everybody knows it's wrong. What does he say? He says, أَتَقْتُلُونَ رَجُلًا. Do you wish to kill a man? أَنْ يَقُولَ رَبِّيَ اللَّهِ. Simply for saying that I worship God? What happened to freedom of speech? What happened to freedom of expression? What happened to the notion of freedom of belief? This man worships God. What's interesting to note, brothers and sisters, is that Musa never challenged the political establishment. Musa never presented a threat to Fir'aun's reign on power. It was not about a coup d'etat. It was never about overthrowing Fir'aun and taking his seat. It was never about that. It was the most peaceful thing you can think of, which is, I worship God, I do not accept your authority in that position, number one. Number two, keep your authority, keep your dominion, keep your government, keep your seat of power. All I ask is that you spare the Israelites, spare Bani Israel. They're innocent. You're using them as slaves. You're killing their men. You're dishonoring their women. You're even killing their infants out of fear that one of them might emerge and, God forbid, challenge your authority. Let them go. Keep your position as the Pharaoh of Egypt. So even though Musa never represented a threat to the dominion of Fir'aun, he was sentenced to death. So Mu'min al-Fir'aun stands up and says, أَتَقْتُلُونَ رَجُلًا أَن يَقُولَ رَبِّيَ اللَّهِ. How could you do this? The reason I tell this story, and I start with this story, brothers and sisters, is that if you look at our history, you find that our religion, our faith, our love towards the Imams of Ahlul Bayt is a tree that has been watered with nothing but the sacred blood of our Imams, and after the Imams, their companions, and after the companions, the scholars of the faith and the leaders of our religion. This tree is so vibrant today. We've been talking, and I know the brother who spoke before me, and a lot of people around the world, we all have this sense that we are oppressed And we're going through some very, very difficult times. And in a sense, that's true. In a sense, if you look around, there are so many challenges, so many threats surrounding us as a sect, as a community, as a religion. There are so many dangers that pose in front of our path every single day and all over the world. There's probably not a place where the Shia community, the followers of the Ahlul Bayt, are immune from these threats, or rather feel completely safe. Nowhere. But on the other hand, if you think about it, we're also experiencing a very pivotal time in our timeline, in our history. In a way, the challenges, and I want you to think about this long and hard, in a way, the challenges, the threats, the dangers, the problems wouldn't be there had it not been for the fact that we now represent a big enough power that needs to be challenged. In a way, we're going through times that, albeit they're turbulent, they're challenging, they're difficult, they're hard, they're painful, they're sorrowful, yes. But that wouldn't be the case unless we were a big enough and strong enough community worldwide. So what I'd like you to think about is the fact that over the centuries, these acts of heroism, these acts of sacrifice, these acts of giving in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala unquestioningly and without remorse and without regret, we've had these all along. There's nothing new about the tragedy that we are living through these days, these past few days. It started with the Imams themselves that I said. And the hadith says, لا يقاس بآل محمد أحد. No one can even be compared with the Ahlul Bayt. Nobody can be compared, no matter how high their stature. They cannot be compared with the Imams in their knowledge or authority or oppression. And so we move on to the next level, the level of the companions. Honestly, when you look at examples like the companions of the Rasulullah, the companions of Amir al-Mu'mineen, the companions of Imam al-Hasan, Imam al-Hussein, those few gems, there's really no other way you can describe them but a precious, rare gem. They're irreplaceable. When you look at someone like our dear martyr, Sheikh Nimr, may Allah bless his soul and raise it to the level of Imam al-Hussein and the companions of Abi Abdullah. When you look at him, honestly, it reminds us of stories that we only heard about from the pulpits. Stories that we would read about in history books. Stories that remind us of the early age of the Islamic revelation. Stories that had to do with the companions of the Imams. Right? If you look at examples like Qambar, a lot of us know Qambar as the servant of Amir al-Mu'mineen. Some have claimed that Qambar was raised by the commander of the faithful. And there's really not a lot about Qambar, because a star, as brightly as it may shine, pales in comparison to a supernova. You put the brightest star next to a galaxy like Amir al-Mu'mineen, and it completely disappears. It gets dwarfed by the grandeur and majesty of Amir al-Mu'mineen. That's why we don't have a lot about Qambar. What we do have is the very last conversation that he had with his murderer, Al-Hajjaj ibn Yusuf al-Thaqafi. I want to take you back to those moments when Hajjaj summons Qambar in order to try him. Talk about summary trials, right? talk about summary executions. He gets summoned to the court of Hajjaj. Hajjaj, initially, like a beast or a lion or a tiger that's about to consume its prey, that's about to hunt another animal down in the wild. I don't know if you've seen those documentaries. Sometimes this beast wants to just entertain itself with its prey, play around with it before it gobbles it up. So Hajjaj used to do that with the people that he wanted to execute. He summons Qambar. He says to him, "Who are you?" He knows exactly who Qambar is, but he's trying to insult him by saying that I don't even know who you are. To me, you're just a name on a long piece of paper of individuals that I'm going to have to enjoy their executions. "Who are you?" he says to Qambar. Qambar says, "Ana abdun li mawlai amir al-mu'mineen. Ana khadimun liman هاجر الهجرتين وبايع البيعتين وحارب بسيفين مولاي أمير المؤمنين علي بن أبي طالب." اللهم صل. He says, never mind who I am. Let me tell you who my master is. Because when you get to know my master, you'll get to peek into my soul, into my belief manifesto, if you like. Once you recognize me as a follower of Ali ibn Abi Talib, you get all you want. There's nothing more to tell you about my personality, about what I do, about what I believe in, about what my ambitions are. He says, "Are you?" He says, "Yes." He says to him, "Then how do you feel about me killing you?" كيف بي إذا قتلتك? He says, إن أنت قتلتني. Qambar replies, "If you kill me, إذن سعدت وهلكت سعدت وشقيت." If you kill me, I'll be victorious, and you will be the one defeated. I'll win, you'll lose. So go ahead, kill me. And that's another thing that distinguishes the true giants of our history, the true giants of humanity, brothers and sisters. Honest to God, I've looked at other religions, I've studied their creeds, I've met the Pope, I've met the highest ranking scholars of many different religious traditions, and I have yet to come across anyone who resembles the little toenail of Qambar, let alone the Ahlul Bayt. Let alone the Ahlul Bayt. And the one thing that sets them all apart, our leaders, our scholars, our maraja', the one who sacrificed everything in the way of Allah, the one common denominator between each and every one of them is the fact that to them, death was something that they embraced. Ayatollah Sheikh Nimr Nimr said this over and over and over again. His sermons are available on YouTube for everyone to watch. He said, "You want to kill us? Ahlan bil maut. Welcome, O death. I welcome you with an open embrace." In the same sermon that he says that mine is a peaceful mission. Sheikh Nimr was an absolute pacifist. Now you might say, well, there are others who feel that taking up arms is the right approach. Well, there's a time and place for everything. But for Ayatollah Nimr, the fact that he was an absolute pacifist only makes the proof that lies on the shoulders of his enemies and his killers all the more difficult to explain on the Day of Judgment. He was so innocent that on multiple occasions he made public statements saying that if you find, and he's addressing his followers, he says, if you find any member of the community carrying weapons, you tell him, we don't need your weapon. Put your weapon back at home. Come, we want your soul. We want your character. We want the tendency to say that I welcome death with an open embrace. Be oppressed. Sometimes, brothers and sisters, sometimes Amir al-Mu'mineen has a beautiful hadith. He says, أَن تَكُونَ مَظْلُومًا خَيْرٌ مِنْ أَن تَكُونَ ظَالِمًا. To be oppressed is better than to be an oppressor. Sheikh Nimr said, I'll be the one who's oppressed. And so, truly, when you look at him, when you look at his proclamations, his statements, and ultimately the way he was crucified, this is what he was sentenced. He was sentenced, in Arabic they call it Haddul Hirabah. Haddul Hirabah is the punishment for one who declares war against God. Because if you fight the king, if you insult the king, if you undermine the authority of the king in Saudi Arabia, you've undermined the authority of God. Is that person not a pharaoh? Not a present day pharaoh? Pharaoh said it openly, أَنَا رَبُّكُمُ الْأَعْلَى. This king doesn't make that proclamation so out in the open, but that's how he acts for all intents and purposes. So when you look at this man, honestly, it reminds us of those characters that we only hear about on the pulpit and read about in books. Qambar is one example. Let me give you a few other examples that are seldom mentioned from the minbar. Right? These are examples that are in history, well documented, but we don't often hear about. Another example is Abdullah ibn Afif al-Azdi. Some of you might have heard that name, but if I say the story, you'll probably recognize the name as well. An elderly man who was blinded, not from birth, but who had been injured and in the process had lost his eyesight in both eyes because he was a warrior in the ranks of Amir al-Mu'mineen. One eye was lost in Siffin, another eye was lost in Jamal. When they bring the severed head of Imam al-Hussein to Kufa, Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad ascends the pulpit. He declares a state of emergency. Everybody's invited to come to the mosque. There is breaking news to be delivered by the governor, so everybody comes. He stands up and he begins his sermon by saying, Alhamdulillah alladhi fadaha al-kadhab ibn al-kadhab. Praise be to God who exposed the lie of the liar, the son of the liar. And then he mentioned the name of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein and his father. You can imagine, we're talking about Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad. We're talking about the son of Ziyad ibn Abih. We're talking about one that Imam al-Hussein, let's not go there. How Imam al-Hussein described Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad, let's not go there. But this is the kind of tyrant that people were dealing with. So you can imagine the reign of terror that had gripped the entire Masjid al-Kufa. Thousands upon thousands of people hearing this man cursing Abu Abdullah al-Hussein, but no one moves. And in the midst of the terror and the fear, this elderly man screams with all his power, saying, Al-Kadhab ibn al-Kadhab, anta wa abuk wa man ammaraka wa abuh. The liar, the son of the liar, is yourself and your father. And so is the one who appointed you in this position and his father. You curse Imam al-Hussein, the grandson of Rasulullah, the one the Prophet used to kiss from head to toe. Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad, being the pharaoh that he was, says, stop everything. Who is that man? Who said that? So instead of hiding, instead of finding a little hole to hide into, Abdullah ibn Afif al-Azdi stands up. He says, I'm the one who said that. What's your problem? The common denominator, brothers and sisters, is that when you do not fear death, you become the bravest, most courageous creature on the planet. There's nothing that can frighten or scare you. There's nothing that would stop you from telling the truth, even if it cost you your life. He said, I said it. How dare you insult Aba Abdullah al-Hussein? How dare you insult Amir al-Mu'mineen? So they hunt him down. He fights. He didn't run away. He resisted. He had a little daughter. He tells his daughter, this is my day. I've crossed the line. I know I'll be killed today. That martyrdom which I longed for in Siffin and in Jamal, today is the day. So his daughter says to him, how could you fight? Abdullah ibn Afif al-Azdi says, I'll grab a hold of my sword. You tell me which way the enemy is approaching from, and I'll fight in that way. So he fights, and he gets killed. He gets martyred. That's another example. Another example, which again, a lot of people don't hear about, is a man by the name of Ibn al-Sikit. Let me give you a little background about him. When kings and presidents and monarchs want to send their kids to get a proper education, where do they send them? They send them to the best universities, don't they? They send them to Harvard, they send them to Stanford, they send them to Princeton, they send them to the Royal Military Academy at Sandhurst in the United Kingdom. A lot of these tyrants send their kids there. So they find the best institutions that can give the best education for them. Back in the day of the Imams, during the reign of Bani al-Abbas and Bani Umayyah, it was the same thing, except they didn't have the best universities. They found the best teachers and educators. Al-Mutawakkil al-Abbasi, who is the vile tyrant that we all know. We all recognize who this man is. Al-Mutawakkil is the one who raised the shrine of Imam al-Hussein, the grave of Aba Abdullah, to the ground not once but 4 times. That's the kind of person we're talking about. Al-Mutawakkil has 2 sons. He wants the best teachers to come and educate his kids. Who does he get? Ibn al-Sikit. Who was Ibn al-Sikit? He was a companion of Imam Ali ibn Musa al-Ridha alayhi salam. The Imam had many companions with many different skill sets. And this man was recognized in spite of his affiliation, in spite of the school of thought that he subscribed to, he was considered to be the very best. And so Mutawakkil gets him to teach his 2 children. One day, Mutawakkil, whose enmity towards the Ahlul Bayt is unequaled, wants to make a point in public. Because remember, everybody recognized Ibn al-Sikit. He wanted to get Ibn al-Sikit to say something about his kids that would raise their public profile. So he says to Ibn al-Sikit, Ya Ibn al-Sikit, his name was Ya'qub ibn Yusuf. He says, Ya Ya'qub ibn Yusuf, Man afdal, who is better? Ibnai am al-Hasan wal-Husayn. Ibn al-Sikit. Now remember, he's employed by the king. And he's not just going to lose his livelihood. Brothers and sisters, let me just open 2 brackets here. The kinds of things some people do for a little bit of extra money is disgraceful when you think of the examples of these great giants. A little bit of money here, a little bit of extra money there, and for what? To violate the rules of Allah, to break His laws, to commit sins, for what? Ibn al-Sikit isn't just going to lose his livelihood. He's not just going to be laid off or fired for making a stance. When Imam al-Hasan and Hussein, the masters of the youth of paradise, are being compared to a bunch of illiterate bastards, Ibn al-Sikit isn't just going to lose money. He knows his neck is on the line. But when you're not afraid of death, Ibn al-Sikit says to him, Wallah. He says, let me go on the record. I swear in God's name, لَنَعْلَيْ قَمْبَرْ أَفْضَلُ مِنْ وَلَدَيْكَ هَذَيْنِ. The 2 slippers of Qambar are worth more in my eyes than your 2 children. So Mutawakkil, being Mutawakkil, did exactly as expected. History tells us, فَسَلَّمَهُ إِلَى الْأَتْرَاكِ. He handed him over to the ancestors of Prime Minister Erdogan, to the Turks. سَلَّمَهُ إِلَى الْأَتْرَاكِ فَدَاسُوا عَلَى بَطْنِهِ. So they beat him up, they roughed him up, they punched him in the stomach, and they kicked him in the stomach to the point where he was on the brink of death. Then historians say, استلوا لسانه من رقبته. They pulled his tongue out of the back of his neck. Brothers and sisters, our history is one that is filled with sacrifices like these. Ibn Sakit isn't unique by any measure. He's not different than everybody else. There are so many Ibn Sakits out there. There are so many Qambars out there. There are so many Maythams out there. You all know the story of Maytham. I don't need to recall it. Amir al-Mu'mineen says to him, Ya Maytham, kayfa bik? What will you do on the day when they ask you to renounce your allegiance to me? And when they present you with only two options, either you renounce your allegiance to me or you get crucified. He says to the Imam, I will get crucified before anything like that happens to me. Before I utter a word that suggests I am becoming distanced from my master, Amir al-Mu'mineen. The Imam then said to him, then be patient, for that is exactly what they will do to you. The way they killed Maytham Tammar, and I don't want to get into this, but what this shows once again, what this demonstrates, is that sacrifice for the cause of the truth is something that runs deep in our veins. It courses through our arteries. It's something we grew up with. It's something we've experienced all along. However, it breaks the heart though, doesn't it? It breaks the heart. Imam al-Hussein, historians tell us, ma nazala manzilan. Every time the Imam sat to rest on his journey to Karbala, he would continuously utter these words. He would say, من هوان الدنيا على الله أن يحمل رأس يحيى بن زكريا إلى بغي من بغايا بني إسرائيل. It's a demonstration and an indication of the worthlessness of this world that the sacred head of Yahya ibn Zakaria would be carried to one of the vile members of Bani Israel. That Yahya ibn Zakaria would be slaughtered so that some king would satisfy his primal instinct with a prostitute. It shows how worthless this world is in the eyes of Allah, that someone like that would kill Yahya ibn Zakaria, someone like this. It hurts when you find that there is no synchronicity. When you find that Imam al-Hussein, Sayyid Shababi Ahl al-Jannah, would be murdered by a 32-year-old delinquent juvenile. Yazid was only 32 years old. He died and went straight to the bottom of hell when he was only 35 years old. It hurts. The tragedy is one thing. The nature of the killer, the murderer, is another. That only adds insult to injury. That only rubs salt deep into our wounds. It hurts to see that our greatest and most heroic personalities would be killed by the likes of Saddam, the drunkard. But the one thing that gives us solace, and at the end of the day, like I said earlier, we see challenges, we see pain, we see misery, we see bloodshed. We need to be given hope. We really need some hope. And the one thing that gives us hope is not the distant past, but the recent history. When you look at our recent history and remember the fact that yes, Saddam did kill at least 5 of our supreme jurists. Saddam did murder Sayyid Muhammad Baqir al-Sadr in his prison cell with 2 bullets to the head. And as painful, as tragic, as catastrophic as that is, what gives us solace is knowing that the last thing Saddam heard was the name of Sayyid Muhammad Baqir al-Sadr. Before the chair was pulled from underneath his feet, the video is on YouTube. You can look it up. The last name he heard was Sayyid Muhammad Baqir al-Sadr. And it makes you wonder that these tyrants, these despots, these vile murderers, these merciless monsters, why don't they learn? Look at your own peers. Look at your own predecessors. Look at other tyrants. I mean, surely you're not the first person to be insulted by the voice, the tongue of a truth-seeking man. And you're not the first person to want to seek vengeance from this man. Look at people before you, what they did to their opponents and what happened to them in the end. Maybe, just maybe, that'll help you live a little longer. Maybe sparing these giants, who aren't just giants for us as followers of Ahlul Bayt. Wallahi, brothers and sisters, people like these should be honored and adored by every single human being. Because they're a rare breed. Because you cannot find anyone who's equal to them. Why don't you learn from your predecessors? Why don't you learn about the fate of Yazid himself, the fate of Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad, the fate of Saddam, and the fate of others before and after him? Maybe you'll learn a thing or two. Killing a defenseless, peaceful, pacifist man like Ayatollah Nimr, simply for using what he called the roar of the words. I've known Sheikh Nimr since I was very young. I was blessed to study in an institution where this man was the chancellor of that house. And every time I think of him, I am filled yet again with awe and wonder. Just how great, how eloquent this man was. Forget his bravery, forget his courage, forget his stance. How eloquent was he when he said that the roar of the words is more powerful than the sirens of the bullets? That even though the enemy may use weapons to kill us, even though our opponent looks at us through the barrel of the gun, we have something much more powerful than that. It's not guns, it's not weapons, it's our word. Manifesting the hadith of Rasulullah when he said, Inna afdal al-jihad, the greatest manifestation of struggling in the way of Allah is what? Kalimatu haqq, is a word of truth. Where? عند سلطان جائر, in the presence of a tyrannical ruler. To actually be there in the eastern province of Saudi Arabia and say these things, honestly, I can't even begin to imagine the amount of courage this man was endowed with by his masters, Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam. How courageous do you have to be? Let me say this as well. If you want to know the true nature of the murderers of Ayatollah Nimr, you really want to get a taster of what they're like, look at ISIS. You've seen what ISIS do? These vicious, barbaric, murderous monsters that we call ISIS are only a creation of the murderers of Ayatollah Nimr. When ISIS fighters slaughter children, cut through the womb of a pregnant woman, cut out the heart or the liver of one of their victims and chew it, this is only but a small taster of what those monsters are like. So when this man stands with absolute fearlessness and says that I do not accept the idea of giving allegiance to you. This is documented by the Sheikh's lawyer, by the way. I don't know if you've come across this before. He says that at his hearing, I believe it was the appeal. At the hearing, the judge says to him, he presents him with the list of his crimes. And at the very top of the list, the worst crime they could attach to him was this: sedition, calling for cessation. So sedition is basically saying to people that let's all rebel against the authority of the ruler. Not taking up arms, just saying I don't accept your authority. Cessation is saying that if you cannot give me my honor and my dignity, if you're going to treat me as a kafir, if you're going to put in school textbooks that the Shia of Ahlul Bayt are kuffar, then maybe it's time we talk about seceding from this country and having our own independent state. That's all he said. So these were his crimes, but the worst crime that he was accused of was this. The judge says to him that you refuse to give allegiance to the king بالسمع والطاعة على أنه ولي أمرك. You refuse to say that the king is your master. Allahu Akbar. Once again, reviving those historical examples that I mentioned earlier and many more. Sheikh Nimr stands up. He says to him, the king isn't my master. I only have 14 masters. The first is Rasulullah Muhammad. The second is Ali ibn Abi Talib. The third is Al-Hasan ibn Ali. Al-Husayn ibn Ali. And he mentions the name of each and every one of the imams and says, they're my masters, not your king. Not your king. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. When you come across these examples, the idea of sacrifice is revived once again. That we have people who are willing to lay their lives on the line to simply acknowledge the Ahlul Bayt as their masters, and to refuse the guardianship, the servitude of false leaders and kings and monarchs and tyrants and despots and so on and so forth. And what this should remind us of is the fact that everybody gets tested, brothers and sisters. Sheikh Nimr was tested in that manner. Allahu Akbar. He says in one of his sermons, he says, I know there are two paths which may be equally valid, and I can pick either of those two paths. I have the option of picking either of those two paths. One of them is al-afiyah. One of them is to simply sit quietly at home, do what I do as a religious leader, give my lectures, give my talks, write my books, do my research. That's one path, and that's acceptable. That is a path that the Ahlul Bayt have given us as an option. You protect your own religion, safeguard your own faith and that of your family and your children. If you can make sure you can do that, even by sitting at home, go ahead and do it, no problem. But there is another path, which he quotes a verse from the Quran, and he says, طَرِيقُ ذَاتِ الشَّوْكَةِ, the rugged path, the path that's not often tread, the path of pain, the path of blood. I choose this one. I choose to be martyred, not by taking up arms, but by first and foremost building myself up. You see, not everybody gets the honor of martyrdom, brothers and sisters. Do you know why? Because that is an honor reserved exclusively only to the very best of God's servants. Not everybody gets that. You really have to be like Sheikh Nimr. And as I said, as long as I've known him, he never missed Salatul Layl. That's how you become Sheikh Nimr. Not by screaming, not by shouting. You don't miss a single prayer. Not just that, you don't miss your nawafil. You're a truly devout and committed man or woman to your faith. You avoid any and all sins. Amir al-Mu'mineen, our master says, اجتناب السيئات أولى من اكتساب الحسنات. Avoiding sins is more important than trying to accumulate rewards. If I pray Salatul Layl but then miss Salatul Fajr, there's obviously something wrong there. Let's try and build ourselves up. Let's create the character, the preconditions, the prerequisites for someone who can stand up with honor on the day of judgment and say that I laid everything on the line for my religion, for my faith. But as I said, it hurts when you see someone like that, someone so pure, someone so noble, being murdered, and not just murdered. People say executed, by the way. I'm opposed to using that term. Let's not say executed. Why? Because criminals get executed. He was murdered. And the means with which he was murdered was crucifixion. Allahu Akbar. What a regime we're dealing with in the 21st century. They crucify people. They actually raise people on the cross and they kill them on a crucifix. A regime where women can't drive. I mean, how do you explain that? Women are not allowed to drive like a child. Women are not allowed to travel unless they have a male companion. Is this religion? Is this tribalism? I struggle with this. I struggle with defining what this actually is. Is this some medieval Dark Ages kind of policies? And then when they appear on CNN, he says to them, to spokespersons for the government of Saudi Arabia, they say things like, what were the procedures, the legal protections you provided to these people before they were executed? And they say, well, our law is the Quran and the Sharia. Really? Your law is the Quran? Remind me again, where in the Quran does it say that a king and his descendants get to rule a country and that nobody else gets to challenge them? Actually, if I remember correctly in the Quran, it says something along the lines of إِنَّ الْمُلُوكَ إِذَا دَخَلُوا قَرْيَةً أَفْسَدُوهَا. When kings enter a town, they ruin it, they corrupt it. Your rule, your law is the Quran? Or do you pick and choose which part of the Quran do you want? Exactly like ISIS does. They're the exact same people. But here's one difference though. It's a big one. They wear cufflinks. Sometimes they even wear ties. That's the only difference. There was an article in the paper the other day that said Saudi Arabia is the ISIS that made it. It's the ISIS that actually won. And now they have representatives in the United Nations. That's the only difference. They have diplomats who mingle with Western politicians. That's the only difference, really. But it hurts. And it hurts specifically because when you look at the tragedy of Sheikh Nimr, and I'll wrap up, you're reminded of the tragedies that preceded him. Specifically, I'm reminded of 3 Imams. By the fact that Sheikh Nimr endured 1,565 days of torture and incarceration, I'm reminded of Imam Musa ibn Ja'far, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi, al-Imam al-Kadhim, who was moved from dungeon to dungeon under the tyrannical rule of Bani al-Abbas. And that's one of the blessings of Sheikh Nimr, isn't it? The fact that he gives us a small sample of what the Imams had to endure. By your incarceration, we're reminded of Imam al-Kadhim. By your beheading, we're reminded of none other than Abi Abdullah al-Husayn, Sayyid al-Shuhada. And by the fact that your body was not handed back to your family and thrown in some ditch to be buried with Al-Qaeda terrorists, by the fact that your grave is hidden and no one knows where it is now, you reminded us of the mistress of the women of the world, Fatima al-Zahra. Ruhi fidaha. Fatima al-Zahra, about whom Imam Ali says, and I didn't want to go here or recite Masa'ib, but why not? Why not? Sheikh Nimr prompts us to do this. He inspires us to do this. Amir al-Mu'mineen says in a hadith that breaks every heart. He describes the ambush against the house of his wife Fatima, his own house. He says, لَيْتَ ابْنُ أَبِي طَالِبٍ قَدْ مَاتْ قَبْلَ أَنْ يَرَى ازدحام العتاة الفجرة المردة على بنت رسول الله Fatima. He says, I wish Ali were dead. Allahu Akbar. Amir al-Mu'mineen has patience that rivals the greatest mountains. Imam Zayn al-Abidin himself describes the patience of his grandfather Amir al-Mu'mineen in Masjid al-Kufa, and he says, أَنَا ابْنُ أَصْبَرِ الصَّابِرِينَ. I am the son of the one who was most patient, and yet Imam Ali says that even my patience has a limit, and this is it. This is the limit of my patience. He says, I wish Ali ibn Abi Talib were dead and not see the ambush against the daughter of Rasulullah, against Fatima al-Zahra, on that day when Fatima called out, Abatah ya Rasulallah, ahakadha yuf'alu bihabibatik, wa la tasalni khabar al-mismari, sal sadraha khuzanat al-asrari. سل صدرها خزانة الأسرار الباب والجدار والمسمار الباب والجدار والمسمار شهود عز ما بها خفاء وجاوزوا الحد بلاطم الخد شلت يد العدوان والتعدي اللهم لعن أول ظالم ظلم حق محمد وآل محمد وآخر تابع له على